Live at the door. All right. All right, you're good. You go inside.
Morning, everyone. I am lucky to have this homie that just released a new record. I have Daniel from Great Wide Nothing. How you doing today?
Doing great. How about you?
I'm kicking a cold out, but like we're still getting through this. It's still important to like push through despite obstacles and green shit coming out of my chest. But it's very important I wanted to make sure because I've listened to this record. I haven't heard anything like this in a while since like listening to like Rush or like or like anything from like Prague era. So like having some Prague keys and stuff like this record straight up. So it's called A Shout Into the Void. This is your fourth LP in 5 years.
Yes.
That's insane. Let's kind of talk about this for a second. I'm guessing you played music before this. This isn't your first band, is it?
No. So I was in a band throughout high school and early college. I refer to us as the shitty, pretentious Christian Rush.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, we were called Omnipresent.
Okay, cool.
And I regret nothing about those years, but looking back, it's a little bit cringe. But I learned a lot. Through that process. Excellent.
Well, like, let's kind of walk through, like, I've listened to a little bit of Hymns for Hungry Spirits, Volume 2, a little bit of Volume 1. I have not kind of touched The Views from Olympus or The View from Olympus. Let's kind of walk through, like, your journey, how you got into, like, this really prog stuff. You also have a very unique voice. I'm not sure if anyone's ever told you that, but like you have a very, very unique vocal thing, kind of almost John Mouse like. It's really cool.
Oh, I've never gotten that comparison.
It's there's something about it that is just like it's just unique. And that was like, maybe I'm just like thinking about unique voices, and that was the first one that popped in my head. Let's kind of walk through your journey, this band, the inception, the whole thing.
So, I mentioned that I was in this band, Omnipresent, right? And, we folded kind of about the time that I was having a crisis of faith, a crisis of, all kinds of compounded crises in life. Really kind of getting hitting the head with the reality stick, so to speak.
Yeah.
But, that band folded, and for a while I was just, very... Sorry, you'll probably hear and see cats back there.
I actually have my door shut because I have 4 cats and 2 dogs in the rest of my house.
Yeah, we just moved to a new place, and they're exploring. So
nice.
But yeah, so that the old band folded, and for a while I was just kind of going through, kind of drifting. Kind of going through a period of listlessness, kind of trying to figure some shit out, and there was a lot of depression involved. And I ended up actually beginning to write again after I started listening to Marillion and Kevin Gilbert, which Marillion's like an 80s neo-prog. They're from Britain, which neo-prog is kind of this interesting movement that popped up in the 80s primarily in Great Britain, that was kind of seeking to cash in on the new wave and punk takeover of things, but apply the kind of the ambitions and theatricality of some of the 70s progressive stuff.
So like New Order, but like turned to like 7/8, like
basically. So some bands that definitely fall into that category would be Marillion, IQ. There's a band called Pendragon. None of them really reached the heights success-wise of bands like Rush or King Crimson or, like that. They're not as synonymous with the genre. But I was listening to Marillion chiefly, primarily the album Misplaced Childhood. And I can remember there was a moment I was on the floor of my shithole apartment in Houston, Georgia, which, if you've never heard of it.
That's a great name. Houston sounds like an Irish town and some D&D folklore stuff. It's great.
It's not an Irish town. It's more of a racist hick town.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, I remember laying on the floor of the apartment, and I put on this record because I'd never heard it at the time. I was just getting into the band, and it spoke so deeply to me, about kind of parts of my own trauma, coming up. There's a lot of the notion of like trying to recapture the innocence or the wonder, the love of life that you have as a kid, that sometimes when you go through trauma, you end up losing, So there were a lot of really deep, really impactful themes in the record, that kind of inspired me to start writing again. It was like, okay, I've got to get all these feelings out. I need to actually kind of fix my psyche. And one of the things I need to do that is explore some of what I've been going through, lyrically and musically, and start trying to create again. So it was that, and it was another album that inspired the kind of the reboot for me was the Shaming of the True by Kevin Gilbert, which Kevin Gilbert was this West Coast producer, multi-instrumentalist, very much kind of straddled the line between prog and pop and all sorts of things. He did production work for Michael Jackson and Madonna. He co-wrote Sheryl Crow's Tuesday Night Music Club.
Wow.
Yeah, but he himself never really achieved the kind of success or notoriety that he chased. The industry kind of chewed him up and spat him out, and he really, really went through some shit and ended up dying by an accidental suicide. But I don't know if, trigger warning, but no, he passed away at a pretty young age.
Wow.
And yeah. And he actually, at the time, had just finished up some of the basic tracks for this album, Shaming of the True. And some of his session buddies out in LA, Dave Kersner, Nick DiVirgilio, they all got together and they finished the record for him. And basically it was released posthumously.
Wow. That's pretty intense.
Yeah.
And also, like, people able to, like, know the intent after being session players, like, to grab, like, the alternative reality and pass that through into ours and see what that homie wanted to make. Like, that's really, really intense and really cool.
Yeah. Well, it's a fascinating record to listen to, because you're basically hearing his ghost, And so the whole arc of that album, it's a concept record. It's kind of a rock opera that's very much autobiographical for him. It's about going to, you might say the big city, the archetypal storyline there.
Classic.
Classic. Going into that, trying to make it as a musician, ending up completely derailed, drowning in, I guess, debauchery in the party scene, in the disappointment, trying to drown your sorrows. But the end of the album is very much a re-examination of, what drove him, Kevin, through the lens of this character that he plays to create art. And it's, what is your motivation? And this is one of the cats, Bean. But yeah, so those two records, needless to say, were very impactful for me, and they got me to start writing again. Awesome. And initially it was going to be a solo project. I was just kind of writing things. I was going to college for music at the time, and I was, writing songs in the piano room and kind of experimenting with that. And eventually, I kind of hashed out these demos, for 4 pieces of music. One was the title track of View from Olympus, which was like probably about 17, 18 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, which that one, the title track only really came after I kind of got out of the heaviness. Mm-hmm. And a lot of what led me through that was I started reading some sorry, I'm very ADHD, so I'm talking around about.
Totally. No. We'll follow it. We'll shoestring it all together.
Yeah. But I was reading Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who was a French Jesuit philosopher and, fascinating guy. He was involved in geology, anthropology, evolutionary biology, and his whole thing was trying to converge religion and science. and he was very much a mystic. And so some of his writings at the time helped me lift out of that kind of depressive fog. It was that, and I was reading Epictetus as well, which
Wow.
Epictetus,
Heavy
classic.
reading. Nothing serious over here at all.
I mean, that's the kind of stuff I like to read, and it's,
Yeah.
I don't say that to suck my own dick. It's just, I seek out that kind of stuff because it does something for me, and
Yeah.
it helps me navigate life.
Do you find that intellectualism is a good replacement for the emptiness from post faith?
So not necessarily, and I wouldn't call myself post faith. I mean, I ended up a Buddhist.
Cool.
Yeah, but I don't think that it's necessarily a replacement, because if you're trying to fill that hole, no matter what you're trying to fill it with, until you realize that there is no hole and there doesn't have to be a filling to the hole.
Yeah, sure. There was never a hole.
Yeah. The hole is an illusion.
Okay, that's great. I love that. And I think that I like the way that you scour the tomes. I feel like there's something really important about there are a lot of ways to deal with trauma, and sometimes it's the bottle and sometimes it's a book. And sometimes it's music, and sometimes it's like loved ones and family. Sometimes it's isolation. Sometimes it's like just, sometimes you just need a fucking padded room for a little bit. So seeing you dive into the tomes post trauma, I feel like it makes a lot of sense to, see this really Prague keys heavy project, take flight. And, from this View from Olympus all the way up to this new record, it's like, tell me about that journey after you were like, okay, cool, this record is done. Did you make it by yourself and then you had to get players?
So the way that it all kind of worked out was I wrote the music, I wrote the songs, and I realized pretty quickly there's no way I can do, there's no way I can execute this vision the way that I'm really envisioning it myself, because I'm a mediocre keys player at best and I can't drum to save my goddamn life. I have a good sense of rhythm. You have to when you play bass, but
you can write the rhythms.
I can write the rhythms. It's just I'm not coordinated or physical enough to pull off the drumming.
Awesome.
So I ended up, I knew the drummer I wanted to work with, which was a guy named Jeff Matthews, who is our drummer. And he and I went way back because my old band played shows with his old band. And to kind of go back to the old band, we had our drummer at the time ended up having a kid completely by surprise. His girlfriend at the time, wife now, didn't know she was pregnant.
Wow.
And he called me one day. We were having practice, and the next day he called me and said, "Hey, I've got to cancel this gig. I'm a dad now." So,
oh my God.
Yeah, it was a wild time. It was a very wild time. But toward the end of that band's existence, Jeff is a pretty good guitar player as well. So if we had our regular drummer in Omnipresent, Jeff would play second guitar. If we didn't, he would play drums. Okay. And so Jeff not only was a friend from another band, and I filled in with his band a little bit too, a really cool punk band called Abide by Lies. But
good pick. I love that name.
Yeah. At the time, they were called That's What She Said, but they changed it to Abide by Lies, which is a lot better. Abide by Lies is a significant upgrade, but the R.I.P. because they're no longer in existence. Although I still know the folks from that band.
Nice.
But Jeff and I went way back. So I instantly reached out to Jeff, and he was willing to jump on board and, help me record the album, help me play some of this stuff live. And I knew I needed a keys player that was going to be a good keys player, not just, little pads. Mm-hmm. Like I wanted him to be able to pull off the kind of stuff that I could only pull off doing a demo, because it's very easy to quantize and write out MIDI scores and things like that. But, and I also wanted somebody that could bring their own flair to it. So I was searching for keyboardists, and a mutual friend recommended Dylan Porper, who's our keyboard player, who also engineered and mixed all the last 3 albums, including this new one. And we got together, Dylan, Jeff, and I, and we tried a few different people on guitar. And eventually, nobody could commit, or they just weren't into the music or whatever. And so we were basically, left in the position where we had to say, fuck it, we're just going to do this as a trio.
Cool.
No guitars unless I'm doing it. We're just going to, do it as a three-piece, which ended up kind of working in our favor because I think it lends a unique, tonal palette to what we do.
Yeah, it's another like weird The Doors kind of thing. Like, that's cool.
Yeah, that's the big reason that the keys are so heavy in our music is we don't have a guitar player. And as a bassist, I'm seldom satisfied, just playing the groove.
Totally.
I want to play the lead lines. I want to play complicated, riffy bullshit because that's, the prog elements are from my adolescence. That was what I was listening to. Everybody else was listening to My Chemical Romance, which later on I came around. I love MCR.
Yeah.
But when I was a teenager, I was this pretentious, nerdy little, autistic kid, and it was like, no, I'm listening to the 20-minute song about Greek gods.
I love it. What about things in weird keys and time signature changes? Is it like there's a term that I actually just learned. It's called frisson, Frisson. Where have you heard of that?
No.
It's like where you get chills really easily from like stimuli of music, like music, movies, story, lore, things that it's just something that I found out that I had where I was just like I watch wrestling a lot, and so whenever I watch wrestling, I'm getting chills all the time where I thought I was getting sick. So like I was like, what is going on? And I just found out there's this thing, and I'm like, okay, that's got to be it. I get the same thing when I'm listening to like prog music where suddenly the drums on the 1 and the 3 rather than the 2 and the 4, and then there's like I just get chills from like cool like moments of that. Like what is it about those moments in songs that keeps you attracted to this where you're still 4 albums later writing this kind of stuff?
So I mean I think a big attraction to prog for me as a kid was the fact that it was like I grew up hardcore Southern Baptist, and my dad at the time was very strict, very heavy-handed, and very suspicious of anything outside Christian music, which but ended up sorry, I totally had my train of thought derailed.
Yes, no, it was.
Let's let it.
Yes.
No, it ended up that we were at a church for a while where the guitar player was like, hey, your son's learning bass, right? And he was like, yeah, well, he needs to listen to this band, Rush. And, so my dad listened to it, like previewed it.
Sure.
Had to make sure that there was no devilish evil influences going in my ears. But, a lot of it was innocuous enough in terms of content that it got a free pass.
Sure.
And so, prog tends to lean more toward like philosophy and fantasy and all kinds of stuff like that. It's not so much about, the drugs, the cars, the girls, that kind of shit.
Totally.
So there was a lot of leeway when it came to exploring that kind of music. So that kind of became a jumping off point for me. And that became my world. And I think a big reason I'm attracted to it just naturally, even setting aside kind of the circumstances, I'm ADHD as hell. and hearing things constantly changing. And, I'm also on the autism spectrum. And so being able to have these conceptual packages, these full works of art that kind of combine all kinds of cognitive approaches fascinate me endlessly. It fascinates me.
Yeah, so, there's something 3D about it that's a lot different about like sometimes music can. I'm not attracted to music that's two-dimensional. I'm attracted to music that like goes beyond just me hearing it. I want to feel some shit. But
absolutely.
like there's something about prog in itself that I don't really listen to. I mean, I would guess that, there's a lot of metal that ends up being proggy just because of like in structure, it like leans to be those kind of things, slowing down, speeding up.
Yeah.
And there's something I think after listening to your record, like it makes me feel like I need a little bit more. Maybe the world needs a little bit more prog. There's something about like the constantly changing it feels not reminiscent, but like really modern. There's something reflective about like the day and age, about stimuli and checking your phone, and there's something about like the constant changing and attention that is required and to live a normal daily life. And prog really is reflective of that because it requires your full fucking attention. And it kind of just grabs your attention no matter what anyways. Like, it's just really, really fascinating to think that like maybe that will have a more resurgence of like a prog or even prog light, anything like that, just to kind of give more.
I mean,
stuff.
I think you can make the argument that, that's been well underway. When you think about, I guess like 5 or 6 years ago, I can think of like 20 fucking math rock bands.
For real.
Which, I mean, that's what happens when indie kind of punk alternative guys get into prog rhythms. Not necessarily the structures and the synths and whatnot, but a lot of math rock is just American football plus odd time signatures.
Yeah, so I completely agree. Like anyone that goes to that Arctangent festival in England or whatever is just like that's probably kind of just all that is. I had a phase of like listening to only that kind of stuff, and I'm thinking about it now, and I'm just like it was so, what a nice time that was, where it felt like I think I was listening to like Light, Lite, which is like a Japanese version. There's so much Japanese math rock stuff like that.
Man,
it's so good.
There's also a fuck ton of really good Japanese jazz.
Yeah.
I've been, that's kind of been a mutual interest of Dylan and I here lately. Who knows? Maybe the next Great White Album is going to have some fucking jazz on it. I love jazz anyway, and it's I played in jazz bands in college, and Dylan's formally educated, so he's proficient in that. Nice. But I've been listening to a lot of like Takanaka, Masayoshi Takanaka, Ado Watanabe, Himiko Kikuchi, a lot of those folks.
I have a lot I'm glad that I record all this because I get to like, I have this transcribed and written down, and I get like all these names of stuff that I get to like, okay, yeah, that's right, it's recorded.
So Flying Beagle by Himiko Kikuchi.
Okay, cool.
Wonderful record.
Everyone listen to that, by the way. It's probably going to be awesome.
Yeah, it's so much fun, and there's a cheesiness to it. They're always with like that 80s jazz fusion sound because you've got kind of the cheap synths at the time, but it's so fun. It's so fucking fun. But I've been listening to a lot of that lately. But anyway, that's a tangent. That's the 88.
Yes, I like it. I like the tangent stuff because it always leads back. The gravity for it to lead back always happens.
Yeah. But I guess trying to get back to, the journey from View from Olympus to here, and kind of the recurring thing that brings me back to progressive music is I think the same thing that's really gotten me into punk and made me really love that kind of music as well, which is fuck the rules. This doesn't exist for a commercial product. This exists because it needs to exist. It exists to communicate something. It exists for a purpose that is more than just, selling records. It's what can I create that is authentically, creative and true to my own vision and my own passion, and what I have to say.
I love that. I think that this makes just a lot of sense just with, the journey.
Mm-hmm. And that's the thing is there was a period where I was very much a purist about, the 70s prog stuff. That was all I would listen to. And as I've gotten older, I've gotten into so many different forms of music. And I've kind of found that there's a horseshoe effect with like the punk and emo and whatnot and the weird ass prog. It's, both of these come from the place of authenticity when they're good.
Yeah, sure.
And when they're bad, they come from the same place of, fake ass bullshit,
Yes, where it's like forced rather than
Yeah.
blossoming.
Yeah. Like, there's a lot of really bad prog out there that
Sure.
it's just rehashing yes because it's like, oh, that's cool. I want to sound just like that.
Yeah, where there's like, oh yeah, I listened to that with my dad, and then oh, I just want to like make this stuff again. Oh yeah, oh, I love yes. Let's just let's do what's that fucking? So let's do Wanderlust. Trying to think, like there's so much stuff that is just can be like, oh, I loved listening to that. I just want to listen to it again and make
Yeah.
it my own.
Yep. I think that I've found through the years there is a common thread that links every kind of good music it just has to come from a place of authenticity. If it's something that's sincere, it's going to end up being good. Like even if it's not good, it's going to be good.
Yeah.
Like if you listen to fucking Daniel Johnston, objectively speaking, that is some horrible, like tone deaf shit. But if you listen to it and understand the intent and the artistry of it, and you recognize that this is coming from a man's fucking heart and soul, you can't help but love it.
Yeah, I think it's like not up to you anymore.
Yeah, it's, you can't listen to something like that and not smile or have your heart broken or something in between. And I think that that's it. I think the thing that's driven me musically, through the years and kind of has become my focus is less, okay, it's not so much anymore. Let me see what I can make that is, going to be as grand as possible or, as sophisticated as possible. It's what's going to connect and what's going to communicate what I want to say and what I want people to understand. And more than that, it's what do I believe that people need to hear? Because I think that you need to have kind of a community mindset when you approach music at this point, especially at our level.
It's like there's this thing where it's like at the beginning it's for you, and then it evolves away from that pretty quickly. Where like it ends up being maybe it's about giving back, maybe it's about like feeling gracious for being able to like pass through certain thresholds as a band. But yeah, 100% there's like kind of this moment where like LP2 and onwards that you're like, well, I want to make sure that maybe it's because you start looking at like what people liked in the first record and you go, oh, people like this stuff, and so you start harnessing those kind of things and going, okay, well, we'll lean into this stuff because I know people like that stuff. Do you find that when you're on LP4, do you find that as you're making music that you're like thinking about like what people like about you all and try and put that in accordance to the stuff that you're writing?
So not so much, honestly. It's, I think, more we've discovered the things that we're good at and found that that's just naturally what we gravitate towards. And coincidentally, that's what people tend to like about us.
Cool.
And I think that ultimately it comes down to that is it's if you can figure out who you are as an artist and what you do well, and not even well in some kind of like comparative sense, it's not a quantifiable thing, but the thing that you do as an artist that no one else could do, simply because it is so unique to what you are and who you are. If you can find those things, the people will come,
Yeah. Ugh. More kitties.
More kitties. There are 4 of them here.
I love that. I'm glad that we both have 4 cats. So my next question, there's kind of this thing where you have a Hymns for Hungry Spirits Volume 1 and a Hymns for Hungry Spirits Volume 2, and then you neglected to keep going on with it. Is that are you no longer hungry? Are these no longer Hymns for Hungry?
So Hymns for Hungry Spirits, it's a song cycle. Both albums are complementary, and they all came from kind of a shared period for me where the title was actually inspired. I was reading a book called The Dude and the Zen Master, which is actually an interview between Jeff Bridges from, he was the dude in The Big Lebowski. It's an interview between him and a Soto Zen teacher named Bernie Glassman. who is no longer with us, unfortunately. But
Did they make a movie about this?
no.
Okay, cool. I just feel like that, that's something that
It would be a cool movie.
Like if someone like actually not playing that guy, but like, yeah, that's interesting.
But, in traditional Buddhist cosmology, one of the realms that you can be reborn into, which you can look at it, from a more practical and, I guess, materialistic point of view, you can look at it as a realm that you could be born into any minute, depending on where your mind's at. Mm-hmm. But one of those realms is the hungry ghost realm. It's where, if you are chasing desires that can't be fulfilled, if you're starving for something, it's where if someone has died without that sense of completeness, without that sense of fulfillment and purpose, they can end up in this realm where they're constantly craving it. Mm-hmm. And so Bernie Glassman, often talked about the hungry ghosts, and that we all have the capacity to be hungry ghosts. And one of the things that we need to do, as people, is help fill that need in ourselves, but also help others find it, yeah. But Hymns for Hungry Spirits, the title came about primarily because all of the songs were reflections on, from both personal and like a social level, that feeling of need, that the hunger, for things that are unsatisfied, I guess. It's very broad. It's not so much like a specific spiritual thing necessarily, but in a broad sense, I wrote all of those songs coming from a place of like desire and longing and pain.
Yeah.
And how to deal with it. And so that the song cycle kind of naturally wrapped itself up in 2 volumes. Mm-hmm. So I didn't feel the need to continue onward. It's, plus, you don't want to be married to the same concept for too long, unless you're somebody like fucking Coheed who can, create a sci-fi universe that you're still milking and living off of well into your 50s, which, I mean, good for them.
Yeah. I mean, the obsession, the Coheed obsession, I had a Coheed phase mainly because of the comics, like the Amory Wars were like, I thought that was like the coolest thing I'd ever heard of. And like reading the story and like, I was listening to that stuff, trying to get more story than I was like actually trying to like listen to them. And I ended up falling in love with Coheed by itself. Like I remember like learning to play The Suffering when I was like 19.
Oh yeah.
Like, I fucking love that band and I love his voice and, 1,000,000% the stories that you get to tell, especially when you want to tell a story rather than sing a song, I think is also interesting. So you get to like, I like that you did like your Shire to Mordor, Mordor to Shire kind of thing. 2 records of that, and that it was a complete story. Like you closed the book, and so after you close the book, and let's take a look here. So that record comes out 2023. Do you tour on? Did you tour? When did you guys start touring? Like,
so it's, I'm a dad of 3, and
cool.
And I work. My wife works. So touring at the level that I would love to tour one way or another, but touring at the kind of level a lot of bands tour is just not feasible for me because I need
totally.
Like we can do a weekender every once in a while. I'm working on, I guess, spoiler alert, I'm working on a short tour for us this summer, later this summer.
And you're based out of where?
Atlanta.
Okay, cool. So that's why you hit Nashville, which is perfect.
Yeah. And we love Nashville, and I became good friends with Jay from Caregiver and all the dudes in Caregiver at this point. They're
so cool.
They're the sweetest fucking human beings, and just I love them. I love them so much.
Did y'all play with Topiary Creatures?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I was gonna wonder because like that's the only other Prague band that I know of that's modern.
I love them so much as well, and like it was I don't want to say bucket list, but kind of a bucket list thing for us to play with them.
Yeah, totally.
Like because the moment I heard, I can't remember the name of the record that came before this most recent one, because I have the Metaphysical Tech Support Hotline, and I think that's their best thing that they've done.
Oh,
You know?
absolutely. No, I'm looking it up right now. Homie's always got the craziest names. You can only mourn surprises. Jeez.
Yes.
Like, save some creativity for the rest of us, you guys.
No, I listened to that and it was like, holy shit, this is, it's like math rock and there's kind of a Phoebe Bridgers kind of sound to it.
Yeah.
And it's just brilliant. And then I heard some of the singles from the Metaphysical Tech Support Helpline. It was like, okay, I have to book with this band. We have to play together. It needs to happen. And thankfully it did happen, recently in February. We were able to do that show with Caregiver and Topiary Creatures. At the Arcane Workshop.
Arcane Workshop. I think I talk about it like every episode. Shout out Arcane Workshop. You're the best venue for DIY shit ever.
Absolutely. And Jody,
it's so
Jody is also just a killer drummer.
Totally.
Yeah.
But that's so cool that you're playing that cool little tour. Where are you thinking of going?
So we're going to be starting in Charlotte and then working our way to Richmond, Brooklyn, DC, home.
Perfect. That's actually going to be a nice little East Coast tour.
Yeah, but it's going to be our longest run to date. Just because it is hard. It's hard financially, in general to justify. But it's hard for me personally just to get the time away. So you have to juggle so much stuff, and it's like. A lot of people, I think, say like, how bad do you fucking want it, right? And I think that when people say, like, even if you never toured, who gives a shit? It's very weird. Bringing that up actually is very relevant to, the discussion on the new album, because that's what Rules of Engagement's about.
Yeah.
I guess let's go ahead and dive right in.
Yeah.
Rules of Engagement, I wrote as basically my big middle finger to that whole mentality of like, you need to give up everything if you really want it,
Yeah.
It's like, oh, if you really took this seriously, you would be sacrificing everything. It's like, I don't fucking want to.
And then you don't have to, man. You could just this, like 95 Corolla was a fucking side thing. It was a dare. It was like, it's not all encompassing. It's, tour is fun. Tour is a vacation, but the people, if I was fucking 20, sure. But I'm 37. Who gives a shit? I've got to go to work and I've got family and cats and dogs. And it's, I read the book, How to Make It in the New Music Business by Ari Herstand. And that was kind of the thing. I read it and I felt revulsion. It was like, and I'm sure that he's a very knowledgeable guy, and and there's some decent practical tips on like social media management and promotion and shit in the book. But the ultimate thing I took away from that was like, oh, you need to completely cripple yourself emotionally and spiritually, and neglect your relationships if you actually want to make it. And it's like, okay, if that's what it takes, then fuck making it. Yeah. Like, thankfully we're in a space where like you can still make music, and it's cheaper and cheaper to make music. Like you can never buy Reaper, and as long as you get a shitty $90 Focusrite. Like, I think okay. So how much would it take to like actually like one microphone, one XLR cable, some inputs, speakers? I'm like maybe $300 to be able to start making music, and you're good, and you're fucking good. That's it.
Yeah, and that's I think that's just the thing for me is I keep coming back to the fact that my why, my purpose in doing this at this point cannot be trying to achieve some kind of quantifiable goal. It can't be meeting somebody else's standard of success.
Sure. What is your standard of success?
Yeah, your standard is what matters. For me, it's if a handful of people connect with what I'm doing and it means something to them, and even beyond that, if it means something to me, if it's something that fills a need in my spirit to communicate,
Like chronicling this chapter in your life in music, that's kind of like the thing. I totally get that.
Yeah. It's, I really could not care less at this point if I ever win a fucking Grammy. I just want a handful of people to, hear it and say, dude, I like that record. It was great.
Yeah.
which it's the fucking meme, there's the meme of like are you winning, son? And then it's, are you winning, dad? And he said, no, but a few people have listened to my music and they said it's really nice.
That's it. That is the whole fucking point. Yeah. Like I think I love this shit, man.
I gotta say, being a dad also changes, I guess, part of your motivation musically and part of your sense of fulfillment. I get such a kick out of my kids listening to my songs and saying, oh, this is my favorite. Yeah, like, congratulations on your new album, Dad. Like one of my boys came up to me and was like, I'm on release day, for Shout Into the Void the other day. And he was like, I'm happy your album's out, and gave me a big hug. And it was like, okay, everything I've done is completely worth it.
Yep. That's it. That's like that moment right there.
And it's,
go ahead.
Yeah. And I part of me sees music at this point as something I can leave for them, as a record of my experiences. I guess there are folks that will leave, written diaries and notes and whatever, trying to help guide their kids. When I kick it eventually, or, when I'm old and they have questions, something that I can point to is the music I've made, because that is a way that I've distilled a lot of my emotions and a lot of my reflections on life, not just on my life, but on politics, on spirituality, all of these things that I really want to pass on and leave as a legacy, I can put into my music. And whether that ever makes me money or not, if I can accomplish that and encapsulate some of my experiences and my life into that art, then it's all been worth it,
Yeah. I think that's actually 100% the whole point. And it should be the whole point. Where do you see, let's talk about this record. That we can go on tangents all the rest of the whole day.
Yeah.
What would you say are the big themes of this record? What were the stories you wanted to tell? And, now that, what did this chapter in your life, what does this mean to you?
So A Shout Into the Void, on, in one sense, there's a lot of political aspects to it, because we're living in a thoroughly unique time in American history and in human history,
Absolutely correct.
And I think there's especially a tendency in our generation and Gen Z, down the line from there, there's a sense of powerlessness, because we are capable at this point of looking on our phones and witnessing the horrors, or more so than at any point in human history. And this is what 1,000 Eyes is about, which it's an instrumental, but the title came from that.
Like kind of a death by 1,000 cuts, that kind of thing.
Yeah. It's so kind of a tangent, kind of not, but 1,000 Eyes refers to the traditional depiction of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion, in a lot of East Asian and Indo-Tibetan traditions and later East Asian traditions in some forms of Buddhism, where this bodhisattva is given 1,000 arms with which to respond to the suffering of the world. And in the palm of each hand is an eye to behold it.
Oh, and awesome.
And so this was actually a talk that I was having with my teacher at the time. Sorry, I hear a cat scratching at something. Michael Elliston Roshi, who is the abbot of the Atlanta Soto Zen Center. Wonderful guy. Really good jazz musician as well, and a painter. He studied, and a designer. He studied with Buckminster Fuller when he was studying design in college. Fascinating dude. But we had a conversation at one point that, as human beings at this point in history, we have access to that perspective of seeing with these thousands and thousands of eyes. It's like a panopticon almost.
Cool.
We are witnessing the suffering of the world the way that bodhisattva in the myth does, the way that that symbolic figure does. And so how do we deal with that?
Yeah.
So a lot of the songs stem from that place, from contemplating, how do we respond to immense, insurmountable challenges and suffering in our own lives and in others, And it's ultimately, I think you have to kind of resolve that it's not about the end, it's about the doing. It's not about what you achieve or succeed or whatever. It's the fact that you just have to fucking do it.
Yeah.
Sure. Let's bring in a Coheed lyric. There's a world's worth of work and a need for you.
I love it. That's you come from such a well-read thing that there's kind of like, do you have like an index at the back of all of your records where like a bibliography or like a source? Like there's just so much stuff that'd be so funny. Like, you have such a wealth of knowledge here.
Stop it. Flattery's going to get you nowhere.
It'll get me so many places. I love it.
But no, it's a lot of the album comes from that mentality, and it's, Utopia. I was reading Peter Kropotkin, which, classic godfather of anarcho-communism.
Yes.
I was reading Kropotkin, and I was also reading Rousseau, if you kind of want to understand some of the thinking that went into the, kind of what the founding fathers were reading when they were drafting the Constitution and creating everything, as imperfect and objectively kind of awful as the founding fathers may have been, a lot of what they were drawing from the French Enlightenment tradition, was based on Rousseau. And Rousseau's attitude toward the function and purpose of government, of society. And so Utopia is drawn from those, and it gets its title from Utopia by Thomas More. Mm-hmm. It's essentially challenging the idea that it's, some fantasy to imagine that we can provide for everybody, that we can have an equitable society. It's the lyrics are, what the fuck is the point of any of what we're doing if it's not to satisfy the goal that society exists for? The only reason that we stopped living in isolated little groups in fucking caves is because we realized that we were stronger together and our needs were satisfied by mutual aid.
Yeah, I completely agree that is kind of the root cause, and then we get separated from it, and then we're just trying to get founded again.
The Western philosophical and scientific tradition has been hijacked, and political tradition has been hijacked by social Darwinism. Mm-hmm. That's not, an anti-evolution statement. It's the idea of the survival of the fittest. It's everyone against each other. That's not how it is. Not in nature either. Mm-hmm. It's actually, if there's another work of Peter Kropotkin's. I was reading Conquest of Bread when I wrote Utopia, but I eventually read Mutual Aid, A Factor in Evolution. And he draws on this wealth of scientific resources, which it's old science. We're looking at like 1870s, 1880s, but there's enough of it that stood the test of time that there's plenty there. And some of these observations by zoologists and folks who have observed, animals in the state of nature, they recognize that even animals work together, and even work together outside of their species at times. There is a motivation of compassion and altruism that's present to some degree, even in, non-human creatures. And I think that it's one thing that we've lost sight of through the centuries, through the millennia, is that ultimately that is our purpose. That is the reason why we exist in community and society, is because we are here to help each other. Because alone we're pretty fucking vulnerable. We're hairless apes with no defining weaponry built in, except a brain. But working together, that's the whole reason we invented language. Working together, communicating and teaming up with each other, that's how we end up surviving. It's how we became the dominant species on the planet.
Yeah, 100%.
And so it's very much, that song is reasserting the fact that it is ridiculous to believe that this all exists, all of our technological advances, all of our whatever. None of that exists because, one particularly perfect guy came up with the idea. It's everybody works together. Everybody draws from each other. Everybody relies on each other. We are all interdependent.
Mm-hmm.
And, we have to understand that there is enough. There is a capacity if we put forth the will. Like if we can put people on the fucking moon, we can feed the homeless family down the street.
That's kind of it. That's exactly. And I feel I listening to this record, I feel that is conveyed. I feel like you did a great job getting all this stuff, brain, hand, bass to fucking, the shoelace through is there. It's awesome. Congratulations. The record is very good. I'd love to, so a couple things. One, what do you do for your day job?
So I actually work at Dunkin'. I sling iced coffees and donuts at 4 a.m.
That's incredible. I love that.
Yeah. I've found that working something kind of mundane like that has been really good for me because there was a time I worked from home, did office jobs, worked in tech, and I found that drained me mentally so much.
Yeah.
That there was really nothing left. And, doing something very, I guess, very direct, very uninvolved cognitively, I don't leave work feeling miserable, Yeah,
I mean, it's like you're able to shut your brain off, use your hands. Like I feel like the sine wave between going from like tech job to like body jobs is real. Like I'm coming from I'm an ex-tech job guy. I'm in between things right now, and I'm hoping maybe I just go work in a fucking warehouse somewhere and just shut my brain off for a second. I think I would be very, very happy.
Yeah, I actually really love warehouse work. I was with a cybersecurity consulting firm that was like a third party, whatever, some convoluted corporate bullshit.
Yeah.
And they laid me off with no notice.
Sure.
Knowing I had a baby on the way. It was great. I was unemployed for a few months, and eventually I had a buddy through music who was like, hey, I've got this warehouse job. We load and unload lighting and rigging and stuff like that. Very physical labor, but you get paid well, and it's completely freelance. So you make your schedule.
Awesome.
Yeah. And it was quite a drive. I was driving about 45 minutes to an hour there and back every day, but that sustained me for a while. And it was so refreshing after staring at a screen for so long.
Yeah. There's something to break break this weird thing, to go the opposite way.
Yeah. Well, and I'm not trying to frame this in a moralizing, kind of way, but I think that there's something more honest about it,
Totally. I mean, computer job is weird. Like everyone that has computer job is just like, it's all these computers just talk to each other, and it's like you're on the other side of it. There's something weird about just staring at a screen and doing tippy tappies.
Yeah. I think it's, to put almost kind of a Marx spin on it, it's you're alienated from the product of your labor.
Yeah, 100%. God.
It's when you're making an iced coffee, you make the iced coffee, and there's the satisfaction, even if you're not getting paid what you should be, which I'm not, but
yes.
Even if you're not getting paid what you should be, there's a satisfaction in like, I made this coffee, it's done, here, take it, and handing it to another human being,
Yeah. I agree with that, with the relationship of Marx, 100%. Like you have your direct relationship to the product that you made.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
I had a thought, and now it's gone.
No worries. I want to play a song from fucking y'all, and specifically from this record. We kind of talked a lot about it. Would you want to play Utopia?
So I like
fucking killer.
Thank you. I like Utopia. It's very different for us, and it was very much my love letter to Enter Shikari.
Cool, awesome.
I don't know if that comes off, but it very much was inspired by Enter Shikari. But
I totally get that.
Yeah. We could do Utopia, or one that I particularly love. Chain of Command is a good one, and Parting of Points. Both of those have stories I can tell. But
let's do. I'm gonna play Chain of Command.
Okay, let's do it. Let's do it.
All right, so here's
Short
Chain
one.
of Command by A Great Wide Nothing. Okay, that was Chain of Command by Great Wide Nothing. Daniel, Mr. Graham, Professor
Yes.
Graham. Thank you so much for fucking hopping on. That it was a absolute pleasure, kind of diving into true intellectualism about like this. You're so well read, and I've learned so much about like this record and how you think. It was such a pleasure.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me, man. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. Well, listen, you have a wonderful rest of your day. We'll talk to you soon.
Absolutely. Thank you, Christy.